If This Goes On, Don't Panic, bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Welcome to Using Science Fiction and Fantasy to Resist Social Norms as part of our Writers Conduit event here in all of our lovely glory. This is Alan Bailey. He is, I am his co-host on the If This Goes On, Don't Panic podcast. He is our panel lead today, and I'm going to let him take it from here.
Hello, everybody. This is the Using Science Fiction and Fantasy to Resist Social Norms panel. Before we get into the deep stuff, I'm just going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves. As Diane said, I am a creator and co-host of the If This Goes On, Don't Panic podcast. That's my main claim to fame. I am just going to pass it on to the next person. How about Oghenechovwe first?
Okay. My name is Oghenechovwe Donald Ekpeki. I'm an African speculative fiction writer, editor, publisher, slush reader, con runner, and, everything else I can get my hands on. I have been nominated for and won a number of awards. As a matter of fact, I just lost my third Locus Award this night, like 5 minutes ago.
Like 5 minutes ago, yeah.
Yeah, Locus nominee just lost, yeah.
Fresh, so fresh. And also the hardest working man in science fiction. Seriously, Facts. No joke.
Facts.
Thank you.
How about Arula next?
Hi, I'm Arula. I'm a neuroscientist and science fiction author. My stories are in Clarkesworld magazine, and my novella Submergence was recently nominated for a Utopia Award. Yeah.
Nice. We are working with them as well in the Utopia, on the Utopia Con. That's gonna be cool.
Yeah.
Let's go with Abriana next.
Hi there. I'm Abrian Tuller. I am the co-fiction editor of Solarpunk magazine. Very excited to be here, especially amongst some very talented science fiction authors. Very excited to be here and have some discussion.
Awesome. And then last but not least, you kind of already introduced yourself, but go ahead and do it again as a panelist.
My name is Diane Morrison. I'm known in the community as Sable Aradia. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer. I'm not nearly as lauded as these wonderful people because they're amazing, but I'm kind of like the baby writer on the panel. Yeah, but I am a SIFWA member. I have been both traditionally and independently published, and I am looking forward to this panel. I'm one of the co-hosts of the If This Goes On, Don't Panic podcast. So, yeah,
cool, awesome.
Can't wait, Alan.
So, thanks everybody for coming. I'm glad that you're all here. I'm so excited to have all of you here. I'm just gonna have some cool, interesting answers. So let's just get in there right now. So I think it's safe to say that the idea that there are no politics in art, and specifically writing in our case, has been fairly well debunked. So we're not even going to entertain that idea, okay? So we're just going to jump right in. Why are the science fiction and fantasy genres so good for politics and resisting societal norms? Let's start with Abriana.
From one thing that I've seen, especially working for Solarpunk magazine, because as our theme for our magazine is, we're hopeful of science fiction to where, the norm is to read dystopian works. Yet we always have like a solution to any problem. And so I have found that, especially working with a magazine that's willing to breach very controversial issues, I have come to find that we go to the depths of what we deem to be something horrific, something that could possibly happen. And then we're willing to band together to find a solution for it. And fiction is perfect for that, because I find that when you write nonfiction, you write a controversial thing. Sometimes people turn that off. But fiction, you're allowed to be creative and explore different norms, reach people that you may not have been able to reach to if you write like a simple editorial.
Awesome. Thanks for that. What do you think, Diane?
I think that since we are creating in fictional universes that are very clearly not our own or our, far future or an alternate history, it gives us the freedom to explore these issues without attacking people directly. And therefore, I think it also lets us immerse ourselves in the character's experience with the effects of these things in a way that we might not be inclined to think about them in, just reading an article, for example. So.
Awesome. Excellent. Arula?
Well, I think if we're specifically talking about science fiction and fantasy, I think the way that they approach resisting sort of social norms is different, but they're both equally beneficial. I think with science fiction, you can kind of create a model of our future and construct like how future societies are going to be like developing and interacting technologically and things like that. And you can kind of also handcraft like role models who are making decisions and doing things in our current like society, or have done things in our current societies that would like make major changes to the way like our world works. And then in fantasy, you can create like alternative ways of how our species like interacts with each other. And like you can kind of think about like, okay, like if we think of an entirely different setup for humanity, these are the ways in which things could go wrong and things could go right, and maybe we could apply those that in super different perspective to our current world. That's kind of what I've.
Awesome, thank you. Oghenechovwe.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, sure. So, why are science fiction and fantasy genres so good for resisting societal norms?
Okay. I was kind of confused because of how Arula broke it down, by going into science fiction first and fantasy separately. So I was thinking it was a science fiction versus fantasy thing. Anyways, since it's the same, I would say that science fiction and fantasy writers, we sort of build this muscle, where we are able to break down or examine worlds, how they work, how they fit together, the process of, worlds, which involves society, community. So we sort of are practiced, or we have a deeper understanding of society, of community, of the way that worlds and people work together. Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Why are science fiction and fantasy so good at resisting social norms? And it's late
Okay,
there, and he's got a locus.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
No. I'm actually just regularly scatterbrained,
Join the club.
Yeah.
Join the club.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a lot of practice. We're trained to deconstruct society. So in the process of putting together or understanding how your world works, how the people fit in, why your orcs hate your elves, why your humans hate your dwarves, why the humans are fighting the elves, you start to go into, deeper issues, how does power work? Why do people react the way they do? So, understanding social norms, social issues is sort of, like a side dish, or it's a part of the process. So that's what I think it is for me.
Great. So I feel like you two, Arula and Oghenechovwe, are kind of want to take fantasy and science fiction apart into different directions. Oghenechovwe, do you think that fantasy works differently than science fiction, or can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, actually, I have a very simple way of viewing it that a lot of people would disagree with. I think that fantasy and science fiction are essentially the same. It's the same principle, it's the same concept. You're just replacing science with magic. That's the only difference, you know. It's sort of like it's the same template, even if some of the elements or the ingredients are different.
I share your opinion, actually. Yeah. And I know, controversy, fight me.
Arula, Abriana, you want to fight anybody? Do you disagree?
I mean, I think I understand that perspective, and I think it depends on sort of going into like the different types of subgenres of science fiction and fantasy, maybe. True. But like, I think science fiction also, there's like a significant part of it that is like creating a model of our future, of like Earth's future, like our current society, and like plotting its like trajectory of humanity into like our specific future, and like how our specific like technologies will evolve over time. Whereas fantasy is kind of thinking about something that's like completely removed, for like a completely like removed, like alternative picture of humans and interactions and like the technologies and things like, and magic and things like that. But I also see the perspective that like ultimately they're studying and using the same tools and devices.
And I happen to agree that they do use the same devices. But what I've come to find about science fiction is that it's more relatable because it has a lot more of the human actuality in terms of the context, as opposed to fantasy where the magic, I mean, it's one of those things where it's a self-belief if you do believe in magic or not. But for the most part, most people believe it's a fictional tool. And even though they both have human characteristics in terms of emotion that are true, that what normally people feel, at the end, I find that science fiction tends to actually show a lot more of how reality happens using technology with human error, where magic will always fix and undo the things that people do.
Clearly you haven't been reading the same fantasy I've been reading lately, but okay.
Well, here's my... Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to just jump in and say that, Sebul Aradia said, if you start to go into, into particulars, there's things don't all have the same structure. You find different types of science fiction that say this whole thing, that support this theory, and different type of fantasy works that support. So I really don't think going into particulars or trying to hammer out, the specific detail. It's not mathematics. We're all correct and we're all wrong in different ways, So, but I just want to say that I agree with what Arula said and what Abriana said, which is that there are distinctions in the way that science fiction and fantasy work. And I quite agree. I'm aware. When I say that, there are, I meant that on a more general scale, it's sort of like how people are people, even though we have different genders and different sexualities, but there's a core way that we walk, at the heart of it, we all have a heart, we all have lungs, we all have, if you split a human being down, there's some basic things, that you'll find. I mean, not that I'm saying you should split anyone down, but, fantasy will get you thinking like that, because there are always people with swords splitting people down. But on the other hand, there are also scientists, evil scientists also taking...
Yes, I get you when you're frozen.
You see what I mean? They all have sort of the same, on a very broad, on a very general scale.
Okay. So I got to ask a question. Okay, so we can all agree that science fiction and fantasy are different in the particulars, at least. Do science fiction particulars and fantasy particulars lend themselves to pushing back against different societal norms?
Yes, I'll agree to that. I think that in general, okay, now remember, broad generalization, and I myself just said that it depends on what you're reading. So, with that caveat, I do think that science fiction and fantasy are make it easier to tell different stories, right? And otherwise, we would they would be interchangeable, and they're not, right? So, yeah, I think that that's fair, right? And I would use science fiction to tell some stories because I think it would have a greater impact, and I would use fantasy to tell others. Yeah.
Fantastic. Arula, do you have an opinion about that? Or do you think one works better?
I think they both work equally well and are both very necessary, but I think the approaches they take are different and but both very necessary. Like it's like the plotting like a future trajectory of the species, or at least a significant part of science fiction, versus like creating like an alternative sort of world where humanity is like developed differently and has a different tool set, including like magic and things like that. Yeah. But for different types of social norms that they work, and I think like in one, like fantasy can really attack like fundamental human nature issues, because in these alternative like societies where humanity is developed completely differently and has like magic, and it's a completely different type of society than what we're used to, or even if it is like sort of based on or inspired by societies on our Earth, it's like they're kind of looking at these like philosophical and like human nature issues that like arise again, even in that entirely different world. Whereas in science fiction, a significant part of it is like looking at current issues, or like how current issues are going to turn into future issues, and like how like our technologies and very much closer to sort of our reality, or the future base that's going to like form based on our current reality, and like really attacking like specific issues that are because of our society and the way that humanity has like developed in like actuality.
Abriana, what do you think?
I actually agree that sometimes the ways they go about attacking social norms might be different, but I do find that the commonality between the two is that they both go after the evil of the social norms. And like you see groups that you may not see normally bond together. The perfect example of this, and I'm a Marvel fan, I love the Avengers, because it's a combination of that fantasy that you have with Doctor Strange, and you have a little bit of that science fiction that you have at Iron Man, and they're both going after an evil entity that's essentially destroying the world as we know it. So this is an example of how they both sometimes go after the same purpose, but they can also go after different ideals as well.
I like that. It makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually brings to mind like a interesting point that like in both you kind of as a writer can like handcraft a role model for people that like is making sorts of decisions that you would want people to make in reality in order to create societal change.
Oghenechovwe, do you have any opinions?
Okay. Yeah, I do. I am. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really draw a distinction between science fiction and fantasy, because I feel like whatever elements that you pick, they are very, very interchangeable. For example, I feel like it's just a matter of viewpoint. For example, Black Panther, everybody talks about how it's futuristic, it's science fiction, it's future projecting. But let's not forget that time, the concept of time itself is based on our perception. It's based on how we interact with time, So depending on how you look at it, the future might not really be the future, For example, like I said, Black Panther is a good example. You see Black Panther and you think future, you think, but if you look at the society, the way it's structured, if you look at the architecture, if you look at certain things, it might call to mind empires like, Mali, Songhai Empire. If you look at their fight stance, you think of things like Shaka, the Zulu. You think of empires like Oyo Empire, So it still has a very it can remind you of the past as much as the future, depending on how you want to look at it. So when we talk about the properties of fantasy versus science fiction, I feel like it's really just what you're looking at the particular point in time, So, yeah, I would say that they're both, for me anyway, I'm not making any rules, For me, I feel like they're both interchangeable and they can both serve just as well or just as badly, depending on, how you take them.
Okay. So we've kind of talked about this topic as a reader a little bit now, laid a little bit of a foundation. I want to talk about this a little bit more from a writerly perspective, since this is a writers' conference after all, right? We've got to throw some tips out there to the writers that are watching. All right. So give me a second here. This is a long question. I've got quotes in it and stuff. I'm fancy like.
Wow. Here we go.
So in 1980, Robert A. Heinlein wrote, "The most difficult speculation for a science fiction writer to undertake is to imagine correctly the secondary implications of a new factor. Many people will correctly anticipate the coming of the horseless carriage, but I know of no writer, fiction or nonfiction, who saw ahead of time the vast change in the courting and mating habits of Americans and that would result." And he said that in Expanded Universe on page 326, according to my quotation here. So everything we write is political, right? I think that's kind of what this panel is founded on, that foundational notion, right? When you're writing something, as a writer, how do you manipulate those second and tertiary implications to say what you want to say? Let's see, who should I pick to go first? Who hasn't gone first in a while? Arula, I don't think you've gone first in a while.
It's an interesting question. I guess I could use my stories as examples. Like, for example, I think it definitely is a useful thought exercise to think about, like, well, yes, like, how are we going to solve current societal issues, or like move towards how would specific or how would we like move past our current issues to something new? But then it's also interesting to then, once you've crafted that sort of next step future, what are the problems that society is going to face once the current set of problems are kind of addressed, whether they're addressed well or badly. So for example, in my recent novella Babarusa, I have an alternative criminal justice future, but everyone agrees like incarceration is bad, like that the way that things are right now is just completely flawed, like, police are gone, in that future. And yet there's still like, it's still not like, it's not like a utopia. It's still like, there's still issues like corporations have way too much influence on like how like things are sort of, how justice is like sort of delivered to things that are considered, and rehabilitation, and there's still like flaws and issues, really major ones that people are solving, and I think it's just but I think that makes things more realistic too, that like no matter how far we progress, we're always going to face a new set of problems. But what we need to do as like humanity is to just continue that work towards like becoming better, and like becoming more like and like fixing things, and just like continuing that steady march towards like building a better future every step of the way. And I think that is kind of how I approach like the sort of secondary, and I don't know.
Right.
Abriana, what do you think?
I agree with a lot of what Arula said, because that's one thing, even though it's science fiction and or fantasy, we have to keep that realistic outlook that there's always going to be a set of problems. That's not going to be a true utopia, because we are people and we all have different ideals and concepts that we follow. One thing that I do on my own writing is I actually write the main character as imperfect as possible. I write them with biases. I write them as essentially myself with a certain personality trait that I want to be more prevalent than I am currently. Fighting an issue that I know is very controversial, because I know in this way I can solve that problem, as opposed to in the role that I'm currently in, where I'm kind of like a lot more bound to be able to fight certain things and in certain ways by certain systems. So I think that's the advantage of being able to write science fiction and fantasy, is that your character can go beyond the sky limit, so to speak, and achieve what we in our humanly body are not able to actually achieve in person.
Excellent. Oghenechovwe, what do you think? And then Diane after.
Yeah, my power just went out. So can you ask the question again?
Yeah. Now I got to remember it now. Let me see here. See, you asked the scatterbrain person asked the other scatterbrain person a question, and now we're both scatterbrained and everyone's scattered.
My audience is quite used to my ADD and other things. I'm sure they understand. Don't worry about it.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
The question was, how as a writer do you manipulate second and tertiary implications in your world to say what you are trying to say politically?
Okay.
Although I will say, again, Oghenechovwe, sometimes you just come out and say it like bold-faced.
That's true. He can be very direct. Yeah, it's true.
About the the ADD thing that Sybil already had talked about. I don't know. I feel like I must have something, because this can't be. I just can't be this distracted naturally,
Yeah.
But maybe I've just never gotten tested though, because health facilities and all that here. But then again, that might be just an excuse for my grades. So yeah, it really just might be me. Yeah, about the question itself. I mean, like you guys said, sometimes I just come out and just say it. I just put it out there, in a bold face, and I've sort of had complaints about that, and I've moved. I try different things. I experiment with my writing. Sometimes I try to make it subtext. I try to make it underline, and I've read those stories with that kind of subtext, or I've had people read them and say that it's better handled. It's more skillfully done when it's subtle. But I had sort of a thing recently, a discussion with someone, and I've sort of been thinking that creating all these issues and making them subtext or underline or underneath the story or sort of silent might not exactly be a good thing. I mean, if you're doing it because you want to, but there's this sort of push behind science fiction and fantasy lately where people say it doesn't have to be political, it's not supposed to be political. There's this constant like, oh, you're talking about issues too much, your work is it's sort of said to be sort of artificial, like it's not natural. If somebody can it's preaching, but you see, it's okay to preach. That's what it's. I feel like when you start to consciously make sure that your issues are silent, then you're getting silenced. It's not natural to you. It's an insidious way of people trying to silence or shut down the issues in society that we want to talk about. So it's like there's all these issues, and a lot of people learn more from science fiction.
Again, Oghenechovwe, you stop in there, or did we lose you?
Yeah, we get it's internet stuff. It's Twitch. We're used to it here too. We're fine.
Yeah.
We know the drill.
Okay, well.
Twitchy.
Yeah. All right, Diane, I'm just going to ask you to pick up from there.
Sure.
What's your opinion?
Okay, I don't know if you're more looking for like for me, I feel like your question is kind of in the mechanics, right? How do I make use of it? Right? Is that what you're asking me, or is it more philosophical?
I mean, I was going more for the mechanics, but I like both answers. So
Okay.
whichever or both.
Okay, from a mechanical perspective, right? I cheat, honestly. History provides us lots of examples of secondary implications of, primary changes. And I was just doing a panel earlier today. Hey, welcome back. Right. I'll just finish my sentence and I'll let you continue. Okay. Right. I was, just doing a panel about using IRL history as inspiration today. And there are so many examples of how these changes have affected us and what the long-term results have been in sort of a spider web of connections as opposed to a linear progression. And I look at that and I look at the change I intend to introduce and I think, okay, what does this look like in history? Because there's almost always an example. And how did that change things? And what did that lead to? And I just work backwards from there, kind of reverse engineer it. So I cheat.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oghenechovwe, we lost you there.
Okay, yeah. It's my network's trying to silence me. So I was talking about this gentle criticism that goes around of science fiction has to be subtle. It doesn't have to shout or be loud or be preachy. But the truth is, there are different ways to pass a message. For example, if say you're with a long-time partner who gets triggered by something and they do something wrong and pointing it out to trigger them, you can present it to them in this whole roundabout way, which is sensitive, which is, nice and thoughtful and caring and all that. That's cool. But if someone breaks into my house in the middle of the night and tries to maybe grab my kid, I'm not going to try to sit them down and try to present the issue. Do you think you should work for your own money and, have your own family? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to grab a mallet and hit them on the head with it. So sometimes your stories require that kind of headlong approach. For example, talking about certain issues like abortion and certain that have been taking center stage in the US. I don't, if it's a serious issue. For example, in Nigeria, abortion has always been illegal, and I was showing someone some statistics recently. The number of deaths from unsafe abortions in Nigeria in a year is more than the number of people that die from Boko Haram attacks in 10 years. Wow. And Boko Haram is the third deadliest terrorist group in the world. So you can imagine, So if I'm approaching certain issues, I don't care or need to be subtle. I need to let you know exactly that the people behind this kind of thing are horrible pieces of, the word, the S word, so, and trying to be subtle in certain cases like that removes from the message. So you find that sometimes you're sort of internalizing this criticism, and in times where you should be loud, you're not. You're allowing, this very deliberate attempt to silence you work. And like I was saying before it cut off, people learn more from science fiction, from fantasy, from entertainment than they do from, classrooms. There are millions and millions and millions of people that go to watch movies, that go to read novels, that, will just breeze through classes and try to pass their exams, So we might be missing an opportunity to educate these people using the secondary devices that we have to educate them. I don't know how much of a tangent or a miss that was from the original question, but yeah.
No, I think you were spot on there personally.
Yeah. Yes. And it's there's so many studies too that show how media affects people's perceptions of the world in various ways, either their own identity in relation to different professions, their own and things like that. And there's like I know, for example, and like since part of my research is like looking at this, you can correlate like neuroscience research developments with major turning points in like with major science fiction sort of like pieces that have like influence. Then there's like a huge like correlation between like real world developments and science fiction or speculative fiction developments. And I think I completely agree with what was just said, that if we say like just bluntly, this is what's going wrong, this is like a fictional example of people fighting against it, this is how that would work, and this is like how things would maybe end up after that fight takes place, like actually writing those solutions and getting those ideas into people's heads, that's going to have a huge impact on like actually getting things to change that we want to change.
I'll just add an example from one of my stories, to Arena, where it tackles misogyny and homophobia and a bunch of other things. And the story starts out in a classroom place where a bunch of teachers come forward and they say a bunch of very, very sexist, terrible, homophobic jokes. And you get it outright that these are bad people, these are abhorrent people. Yeah. I want you to get it. They are bad, abhorrent, horrible people to the letter. I don't want to show you the kind side of them. I don't want to show you why they were the way they were because they were maltreated, or I don't want to be subtle. We don't need to see the other side. It's not that story, as John Whistle would say. So sometimes there is a need to be exactly the way that you need to be, and I got some criticism for that. People said the characters were exaggeratedly bad. I've also had someone say that the characters in a story, that I wrote, my novella Ife Yoku, who were basically trafficking, black people. They were sort of modern day slavers, were flat. They were just evil, and what the person didn't get, mm-hmm. It's deliberate. I can write very nuanced characters, and I have, but I don't care to make modern day slavers nuanced. I don't want to show you why they are the way they are. I don't care to humanize them. Mm-hmm. Because we should immediately understand. I want people who read that story, who see people like that in reality, mirrors of those characters, to immediately see them as horrible monsters that only deserve to be hated. That may sound harsh, but I sort of prioritize my survival more than, caring about those people. And that's what it is, for certain groups of people. So, yeah.
Honestly, I'm on your side. Right? There are things that we simply should not tolerate or try to see in a nuanced way. We should recognize it as evil when we see it. And yeah, I share your opinion. There's no point in being subtle about it. Not unless you're trying to write about how to sway someone from that path and that's your story, right? If they're like, if you're supposed to know that they're a threat, yeah, I share your opinion. I do. And yeah, I know that's controversial too, but I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here. I got the 10-minute notice here. Do we have any questions in the chat? And if not, I've got another question that I want to ask everybody.
Well, if I could get you to hold off, actually, I might take this as our break, if that's all right with you. Just we'll take a brief break here for bio or whatever, because we're about halfway through. All right, and so say 5 minutes, and then we'll come back, and it'll be a new call link, so we'll just proceed from there however you want. If you're okay with that, Alan, it's your show.
Okay. See y'all in 5 minutes.
Yeah, bye.
Solarpunk Futures is a podcast about building radically hopeful futures through storytelling and exploration of the solarpunk genre. The podcast features readings of science fiction stories, poetry, and articles published in Solarpunk magazine, as well as interviews with authors, activists, artists, futurists, and others from the solarpunk community who are envisioning and actively creating a better future. You can find Solarpunk Futures anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also listen directly on our website at solarpunkmagazine.com.
All right, and we are back. All right.
Okay.
Take it away, Alan.
Yeah. So when we left off, we were talking about being very upfront with our views and what we're trying to do in our fiction. First, let me ask, does everyone agree with that? Abriana, we haven't heard from you for a while. How do you feel about that?
For me, it depends on the context and what you're talking about, because some stories require that you start with subtlety and then you have like a major like pow factor at the end. And coming from a romance background myself, that's just like the format that we follow. So it all depends on the genre and the context and the audience you're trying to reach, because some work best with subtlety, some the outright approach, and then some you have to do like a mixture of both. So it all depends on your audience, who you're trying to reach, what you're talking about, and things, factors like that.
Yeah. I like that. I agree with that. Which, just in case I wasn't clear, that's what I'm advocating for. For you to tell the story in the way that it demands. But it seems to be like the default, the supposed cool way to tell a story, or expert ways for everything to be subtle and subtext and, underground. And if you don't do that, then you're some kind of amateur, who doesn't know how to tell stories well.
Yeah. Arula, I saw you shaking your head a lot when he was talking. How do you feel about it?
Oh, no, yeah, I think I completely agree that it's just the type of story is going to be the best way to approach resisting the social norms is going to vary from story to story. But I also actually I want to bring up a point that we've talked a lot about writing resistance and fighting and writing the bad and the ugly and going against that as a way to resist the social norms. But I also actually think another way to resist a social norm is to just write joy and write write a new norm without any fight involved. For example, writing a world where people are queer and it's not a big deal. That's not the central issue of their character, that their struggle with the social issue isn't the focus. It's their adventure, the whatever, the story, the plot. That's just a part of them, but it's not it's not a struggle for them. It's just the norm already. And that's another way that that speculative fiction in particular can do that. It's you can literally write a new norm.
Okay. Can I jump in? Can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm writing something with a writer that I've compared notes with them, and we seem to be writing parallel work. We seem to be telling the same story, but from exact opposite perspectives. We're trying to do the same thing, criticize something, but I'm doing it from the resist angle, fight. It's in a dystopian society, and the person is writing from a utopian society where they're showing, the full-on utilization of the thing which is scarce in my world, which they are fighting for, So it's doing the same thing. It's showing, that this thing is good, we should have this thing, but it's coming from different angles. So I totally agree with what Arula said. I would just like to point out the impulse. There seems to be more resistance stories, because the truth is, they say write what you know. And a lot of people know resistance more than joy. I'm sorry, but think about me, for example, an African coming from a history of slavery, racism, neocolonialism, post-colonialism, we've known nothing but fight and combat, for centuries. If there are 10 of us who are writers, 7 of us are going to be writing resistance. Only 3 of us will have the wonder, to totally come from a totally different perspective. And that I think that, so it's something we should expect. That's what I wanted to comment on. I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just sort of explaining the reason for it. People seem surprised that there are more resistant stories. People seem surprised that there are less joy stories. And they sort of see it as an anomaly and something they have to beat down on. It's a natural impulse. People are not going to be able to imagine joy more until there is more joy, until there's more experience of it. You can't force joy. People have to see it to be comfortable with it enough to try it. But resistance is something that we're more familiar with, that we can reach for, that we can. So I wish that people would stop seeing, resistance as too much, or it's a reflection of the world we're in, of the way that things are.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that observation because, while writing the questions for this panel, I also took that approach. I took the resistance approach, and I think I often take the resistance approach on our podcast as well, more than the joy approach. And I'm probably the most privileged person here as a white, straight guy in America, right? And I still take that resistance approach quite a bit too. So that's really interesting. So let's talk. Go ahead.
You're a liberal person. You're an ally, so you witness a lot of your friends and people you care about having that resistance. So you're a part of it, whether or not, So it's an impulse.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree with Arula, by the way. I respect people that do that. Yes. In fact, the person I'm writing parallel with that is doing that, I think they're a much better writer. I think what they're doing is much more difficult. And I would prefer that people read mine before theirs, because I think that that's a much more cooler story. And you might not like mine so much after, I'm not trying to detract at all from that or say it's bad.
Sure. Well, let's talk about writing joy for a minute then. I think when people see joyous fiction, they're usually like, well, what kind of conflict is there going to be in that? Like, how does that work exactly? You know what I mean? I think that's what the general population would think. So Diane, you haven't been first in a while. How do you write joy in the fiction, and like, how do you create a conflict out of that? Or is it even that different?
That's a good question. I think you need to give people a glimpse of what to hope for. If I joke that we live in the cyberpunk dystopia we tried to warn you about back in the 80s and 90s, right? Here we are. It's here, right? And largely because all of our stories, I think, were cautionary tales, right? But some people took it as an instruction manual. So maybe we should give an instruction manual more often about what a better society can look like. And from that, I don't know, then people ask, well, where's the conflict, right? Because story is in conflict. But the conflict could be preserving one of those values, right? The conflict could be in trying to deal with the unforeseen consequences of having made of some of those decisions. Like Arula said, right? It's not all lovey-dovey, everything's perfect just because this is better. We still are going to have problems we're going to have to work on, and some of those we're not going to be able to anticipate from where we are. Right? So yeah, dealing with those kind of issues, or, maybe a kind of a historical perspective on how they got there might also be a really good way to approach that. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned writing an instruction manual for the future. So I feel like this is something, Arula obviously has something that she wants to say there. I saw her face light up and kind of
cool, excellent.
But I also think Abriana probably has something to say here because coming from a solar punk editorship, I mean that's really kind of what solar punk is. At least that's how I see it.
Sure.
So let's go with Arula and then over to Abriana.
No, I mean, I think like, yeah, my face lit up, but it was, I mean, it was just, I really agree with the instruction manual for the future thing. And like, yeah, if you like that, I really think that's the most powerful thing that we can do with speculative fiction is just like show people these are the steps that we can take to reach a new norm, or like or this is what a new norm would look like, and this is the next set of problems, or just like or this is the type of person that you should strive to be in order to create like a ripple effect of change. Like these are the kinds of characters, like that is where the true power is in like using this type of entertainment, which people like consume so much and are exposed to so much, using it as a tool to actually like, you know, burn down corrupt systems and build better ones in their places.
Awesome.
Abriana, what do you think?
I agree with all the points that have been mentioned, but one thing I wanted to point out is, especially being with Solar Punk Magazine, is that oftentimes we look at society as solving our problems when sometimes we need to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we're like, okay, the society as a whole is responsible for solving the problems, but yet we don't oftentimes look at the internal work that we need to do so that the other people in the society can use us as an example to dictate how a certain end or a certain result will happen. And so that's actually... when we get stories at Solar Punk Magazine, that's actually what I look for, is that people do have internal reflecting stories, because I do like to see societal change, but I also like to see internal change. I like to see cultural change, because oftentimes, especially in the American society right now, we have all these different cultures, religions, ideals, but not all of them are being respected right now. And so it's important, in order to have even somewhat of a utopia, we're not going to ever truly have a utopia, but something close to it. We need to have a better understanding of how people are, what they believe, and then also have an understanding of what we're not willing to accept. And I think that's important in any story. And when it comes to story of joy, the conflict can be an eternal one. It doesn't necessarily have to be a conflict with a character. It doesn't necessarily have to be necessarily the problem itself that's the conflict. It can be a change in ourselves. Like maybe we had a bias that we found out is very harmful to changing a society. And so we look at that and we work through the story to change that. So I just wanted to point that out, that sometimes it's an individual change that's just as important as a societal one.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you. I want to go back. Well, first of all, how much more time do we have, Diane?
We have about 20 minutes left total. We like to end 5 minutes before the end of things, so it's actually like 15 minutes. Yeah. Okay,
and then we're taking questions from audience members too, right?
So if I assume we probably would, and yeah, we've got to do that with the 15 minutes that are left. So however you want to divide them.
One last question then. I had two last questions. Which one should I go with? Okay, one last question. Then thinking back to something somebody said, they said, we spend all this time learning from fiction, right? Instead, even more than we learn from maybe a classroom, for example. Then is it a moral imperative for authors to write like stories pushing against the social norms?
Do you mind if I speak on this one first, just being a former educator?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, being a teacher, one of the things that I often had to fight against is that people expected, because I was an educator, that you had one side that expected me to teach morality and the content, and one side that wanted me to just teach content and not have any personal views or discussions or anything like that. So oftentimes teachers were faced with the battle of, okay, If we're going to be forced to just teach content, fine. We're going to use the fiction to teach what we need to teach. And that includes being a better person. That includes helping people. That includes finding out your identity, respecting identity. So we would use fiction. And sometimes in using fiction, it had to be something that was controversial because that, as mentioned earlier, was the impactful way that we had to do it. So yes, sometimes you do learn from fiction more than in the classroom, but sometimes you learn from them together. So I just wanted to share that perspective that in that instance, we used it together.
Great point.
Excellent. Thanks. Oghenechovwe, I haven't heard from you in a second. What do you think?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do authors have a moral imperative to push back against social norms?
Okay. I mean, for me, it's not really moral. It's more survival, For example, if all the social issues in society, be it misogyny, even if I'm not a woman, toxic masculinity will kill me,
Yeah, it will.
Homophobia, it trickles down, So it's I hope that that's not being too selfish, but yeah, it's more about the immediate. Those issues affect everybody. It's something that we have a practical responsibility towards, and it's not all practical. I mean, it would be terrible if that was. Yes, I feel like it's our responsibility to try to influence what's happening around us, and fiction is a tool to do that. So yeah, I mostly gravitate towards using my fiction, which is one of the tools available to me to do that. Because I'm not going to run for office. I'm not going to try to make laws. I'm not going to try to be in the army and fight people. I mean, I wouldn't survive in the army. So yeah, fiction is what's available to me, and it's a very powerful tool. The pen is mightier than the sword, as they say. We can see how much harm legislation does, and the people that make those legislations had stories that fed into their ways of viewing things. So basically, yes, I agree.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go to Diane, and then I'm going to Arula wrap things up. Diane, what do you think?
I don't want to say, I say yes, but with a caveat, right? Okay, the caveat being that I think that writing for its own sake is valuable. Sometimes you don't know what you think until you start writing about it. If you're doing a journey of discovery, or you just want to entertain yourself as a writer, I think that's valid, right? I also think that writing is something I do. Okay, sorry. And I'll unmute as soon as I'm done. Hopefully that'll stop. I see what he means about the network. Yeah. Okay, on the other hand, whatever gods there are gave me the ability to write. It's something I'm pretty good at. And I don't do a lot of other things well where I could make change, but this is one thing I can do. So I feel that I should. Yeah.
Awesome. Arula, what do you think?
I think that with the state of the world right now and with the amount of issues that need to be fixed, I think, honestly, yes, as an author, I feel like a moral imperative to resist social norms with my fiction. And it's not that I have, and I don't want to like tell people what to write, but I definitely like kind of lose some amount of respect for authors who are just kind of not using their like talents and skills to like fix these issues because they can. We literally, it's such a powerful tool. We've talked this whole panel on how much it can influence people and audiences and actually generate change. And that's so needed right now that I think it's our responsibility as writers, if we have this talent, to use it at this moment in time. This is not the time to be just complacent in these incredibly flawed systems that really, really need to change. And in so many ways we're moving backwards in time and things are just getting worse. If we have a power and we have a tool and we have an ability, now is the time to use it, because it's needed right now. It is our moral imperative. It is our responsibility. I don't know.
Hey, may I add something to that?
Sure.
I see where Arula's coming from, but this is a point I want to make as well. Just because someone has a tool doesn't mean they're able to use it well. I'll give a perfect example. As a former educator, there's people that knew math. It didn't mean that they knew how to teach it well. You can't have everyone be a teacher. So yes, we have writers out there that do have a set. However, not everyone's meant to work to write about social commentary. Not everyone has the ability to bring about the impact that we need. And actually, you have to be careful with who is writing stuff and from what viewpoint, because sometimes that tool can be used in a way that's either intentionally evil or it might cause problems down the road. I know that there's a couple of romance authors recently that have been looked at suspiciously because on the book cover, they have African-American characters, yet in their writing, the characters are not people of color. So to someone that's a person of color, that's an evil act. You're portraying a book to include people that you do not have. You're representing a point of view that you're not inclusive of. So we just have to be careful that when we have a call to action, that we're specific about what that call to action entails, and that we understand that the people that are utilizing these tools, they need to know how to use them. It's very important because power, it does come with consequences if we're not careful. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's a really good point, and I entirely agree with everything that was just said.
Awesome. Great discussion. Let's see if there's any questions in the audience there.
Yeah, anyone who's unmuted will have to unmute themselves, apparently, even if I muted you. So, sorry. Yeah.
She's talking about you again, Oghenechovwe.
I am.
It's fine.
Yeah, do we have any questions? Do we have any comments or thoughts about what we've been discussing? We've been pretty animated getting involved in this, and I love that. That's so much fun for me. But what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there something somebody said that was, particularly resonated with you, right? Let us know.
Okay, I'll add to what Arula and Abriana just said, that I feel like if you're building accurate worlds, if your writing is solid, then it would automatically tackle all the social issues without you having to, for example, if I'm telling a story about, say, romance story, but and there'll be people in my story, right? And there'll be black people and there'll be queer people, and the dynamics of blackness and queerness are going to be present in my story, So I feel like if you're portraying or you're telling a story that has enough accurate elements, then it will tackle those issues without you going out of your way to, So I feel like it's not. Maybe it's not really a question of should we. It's a question of maybe we cannot not do it. That's kind of how I think of it.
Makes sense. Diane, did anyone pop in with any questions? Because if not, I've got one more final question for everybody.
Sounds like that'll be a great opportunity. Emily Armstrong says this was an absolutely fantastic panel. Really great discussions. Thank you so much for talking about all of this. Awesome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
We love it. So let's do it.
All right. So this is a pretty easy question for everybody. No, you can shut your brains down a little bit. turn on the fans. Just, what should people be reading in this theme? Are there any books, any stories that you think you want to suggest to people out there? Stories that push back against social norms that you think the audience should be reading?
Yes.
Go ahead, Diane.
It's an old one, but a good one. It's a classic, but it's more relevant now than perhaps ever. Octavia Butler's Xenomorphosis series. Go read that. Do it now. Trust me. Yeah.
Awesome. I definitely need to read more of her stuff. I have read but one short story. And I've outed myself as well. Okay. Who else wants to go? I'll take volunteers for this one since we're just kind of chilling out now.
I think one that I really liked recently was The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. Just a story about like fighting against a systemic issue and like and queerness and all sorts of things that I don't know. And it was just like a beautiful world too as well. Also Infomocracy by Malka Older. Those are my two recommendations.
I love Malka and all her work. She's an amazing person. Let's see, Abriana or Oghenechovwe, who wants to go next?
I can. I have a couple of suggestions, of course. My magazine, Solarpunk Magazine, because we have some awesome stories in there about hope and change. But also, if you're more into like the dystopian dark like warning of what could be, definitely 1984 and definitely Fahrenheit 451, because we're seeing a little bit of censorship in literature. And then, we don't want groupthink. We want people to think for themselves and to make change. So definitely those two if you want like an instruction manual about what not to do.
ODE, what do you think?
I'd recommend my story, O2 Arena. It's published it's free to read in Apex Mag. You can just search O2 Arena, Oghenechovwe. It won the Nebula Award and it's a Hugo and BSFA Award finalist. You can check out the Dominion Anthology. It has a number of works from other writers, Dale Mandela, Mem Diane, and a couple of other people. You can also check out the year's best African speculative fiction anthology. You can just look it up. It's free to download in all formats on my website, Jengbe Fola Press, which again you can just search on Google. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Anything else you want to recommend?
Oh, sure. Fire Magazine. They've got awesome speculative fiction. So please check them out. Like, they're amazing.
Van Whitman in the chat, first-time chatter, says, sometimes you have to go in a roundabout way to find writing that bucks social norms. Not everyone in the world has the luxury to find those writings due to circumstances brought about because of where they are, laws and censorship and such. Yeah, that's valid. Always been a thing. And, so those of us who do have the luxury should exercise it, right? I think. I don't know what anybody else has to say.
Absolutely.
Arula, you're muted again.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes. I think if every single person took stock of like what their privileges are and used those as a tool to help other people without those privileges, the world would just be a better place in general. So
yeah.
How much more time do we have, Diane? We got to be counting down close here.
Yeah, we're pretty much at the end of it here. We should be wrapping up. Are we going to ask everybody our usual questions since we are also going to be airing this as a podcast?
Yeah, we might as well. Okay, so some of you on here have answered this question before, but some of you have not. So we'll start with those who have not. Abriana and Arula, what is bringing you hope right now? Whichever one of you wants to go first.
What's bringing me hope is seeing all these resistance groups come to the front, and it's of people that are our allies and not just people that just look like me. So that's hopeful that there's actually some change about what's going to be happening in the U.S. I'm very hopeful that things will change, even though they look kind of like dystopian like right now. But that's a major part is that people are actually taking action when in the past they were not.
Yeah.
Arula?
Yeah, that I agree. I mean, even when we're looking, I was looking at like the abortion protests, and I saw someone like who was an ally like climbed this bridge and took this like really like literally put his life on the line for a cause that didn't like directly like affect him. And seeing stuff like that is really powerful. Like these people who are passionate about altruism just in general brings me hope. And like seeing people who are selfless and altruistic and empathetic, not even just on a large scale or like making things like that, but even just like on a day-to-day, like kindness, and like when people stand up for what's right, or when people like without looking for recognition or like boosting their own image, just choose to do the right thing, even when they won't get anything from it or they don't expect anything from it. That's the sort of stuff that gives me hope.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Oghenechovwe, you've answered this question before, but it was a long time ago. What are you thinking right now?
Well, I agree with the sentiments that both Arula and Abriana shared. It's as much as it's what's the word? It can be a bit triggering. It's also inspiring. The wall of hate and anger, and it shows that people are moved, people are aware, people have a desire to change things. And I always say that there's nothing that can change. There's nothing that cannot change. People talk about the effects of religion, and I tell them that there was a time when every major world religion, the figure that it was founded on, there was a time they didn't exist. There was a time Jesus Christ didn't exist. There was a time, so all this, there's nothing that cannot change. There's everything can be done and everything can be undone. All that it requires is human will. So I'm happy to see all that happening. There's a will for things to change, and that gives me a lot of hope that things will change.
Awesome. Thank you. Diane, do you have time to answer that question? I don't think I've ever heard you answer this question.
Yeah, maybe not. This gives me hope. Having these conversations with like-minded people, knowing that there are others who are either angry or have a greater vision for something that we could be. Yeah, and then hearing about what we're all individually doing in our own small way to make that better, and working on ourselves as well, as Abriana has pointed out, right? Like doing our own internal changes. Yeah, that gives me hope. That gives me a lot of hope.
Awesome. And it's 8:00, so I'm assuming that's it for us?
That's it. We're done. Thank you all so much for joining me today here, and thank you everyone for joining us for the panel. We're going to move back into the Writers Conduit channel, of course, where you'll be able to find your way to whatever the next event is that you would like to attend, and I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today.
Cheers.
Thank you guys so much. I was honored.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the panelists for your brilliant opinions.